Hey everybody out there in virtual land, this is Debs here, and I want to bring you a message of hope at this time when everything's crazy. And I guess if I was titling this talk, I'd say, what do we do? What do we do when we're in these kind of extraordinary times? What do we do? And I want to talk to you and tell you about and remind you of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. So I want you to picture it with me. He's there. There are at least 5,000 men, not including, because they didn't count in those days, women and children. And he's surrounded by all of that need. Can you imagine the pressure that he might be feeling? You're surrounded by all those people and they all need feeding. It's been 3 days and no one has anything. And you're worried that if you send them away, they're faint. They could be hurt in some way. They're faint with hunger. And the pressure must be immense. If that was me, I'd be, lying down in a darkened room, weeping with stress about it. And I wonder if you can relate to it. If you think about the government at the moment, the pressure they must be under, there's so much need, there's so much problem, what do we do? The medical profession, there's so much need, there's so much pressure, what do we do? But if I just bring it down a bit, those of us who, have had to stop working, we're worried about whether we're going to be paid. We're looking at the empty cupboards and looking at the empty shelves and thinking, what do we do? And maybe we can relate to the story. And when I think about that, I think I could relate to Jesus. I'd be under pressure, really stressed. And then I think about the comparison between him and the disciples. The disciples, their attitude is just send them away. It's their problem, not our problem. And I think I can relate to them as well, because when you're in crisis situations, when things are difficult, it's then that you think, I need to look after myself. I need to protect number one. To use a silly example, I've got 6 toilet rolls left. How long's that going to last? The shops are bare. What do? I want to hold on to those things. I don't want to share them. It's every man for himself. Charity begins at home. That kind of mentality. And where does that come from? I guess if we dial it back, it comes from fear. Fear that there's nobody looking out for me. I have to look out for myself. Fear. These are crazy times. It's never been like this. I feel completely insecure. Fear, basically. And the disciples are thinking, we can't do anything. And I guess the other dialing it back thought is inadequacy. What can I do when there is such a crisis, when there is such a need, and it's so much bigger than anything I can bring? And I can relate to that as well. And then in the middle of it all, there's this little boy. And, kids often lead the way, don't they? And the boy brings what he's got. His 5 loaves and 2 fish. And it reminds me of a story I saw of a little chap, 7 years old, I think, who's been knocking on doors and handing out toilet rolls. Somebody who goes in the opposite spirit. And he gives what he's got to Jesus. And that's amazing. That's incredible. I want to be more like that little boy. But then what I want you to think about is, what does Jesus do in this situation? What does he do? He doesn't plead. He doesn't get into panic. He doesn't send up huge long prayers. What he does is he looks to heaven and he gives thanks. He gives thanks. And I was thinking, what is that about giving thanks in that moment? And I think giving thanks means you immediately are remembering who you are. I'm loved. I'm loved. And you're remembering who God is, that he's my Father. And he's the Father who knows what we need. before we even ask him. He's the Father who knows every hair on our head. He's the Father for whom not one sparrow falls without him knowing about it. He's the Father who nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from his love. And Jesus just looks to him in that, and can you feel the peace that must have rested in that moment? And he just gives thanks. And that's where the miracle occurs. And suddenly 5,000 men, and however many other women and children are there, get fed by 5 loaves and 2 fish. And you know, we live in extraordinary times, and normally we don't need God to turn up for us, actually. I've got my credit card, I can go to the shop, I can go to the hospital, you know, I can actually meet my needs. But I want to say to you, at this time, the fantastic thing we can do is give thanks and see what God's going to do. Expect God to move. Expect him to do extraordinarily more than you could ask or imagine. Don't look at the lack. Don't look at the pressure. Don't look at the empty cupboards. Don't look at the empty purse. But look up to heaven and look to God and give thanks. That's what Jesus did. He didn't have his eye on the problem. He didn't have his eye on the lack. He had his eyes on God, and he thanked God, thanked him for who he is and for his love. And just in that moment, God moved. So what do we do in times of crisis? Here's my top tip. Give thanks. Not for the crisis, but in the crisis. Because there's God, and because he loves you, and because he can do amazingly more than we could ask or imagine. Give thanks, and let's see what God can do. Hey, hope you like my message. Bye.